Morning, church. We're halfway through the week. It's Wednesday morning, and it's actually quite windy here in Southern California. At least at my area, I'm on top of a hill, so it's definitely a little windy. So hopefully you guys are staying safe and keeping the things that you don't want to fly away indoors. And I pray that this day would be another opportunity for you to draw closer to God and to hear what God has to say for you. With that, let's begin. Now, if you didn't know, I didn't really start to grasp and understand the Korean language until I was almost a senior in high school. So it took a while for me to kind of grasp it. Of course, I knew basic words like 엄마, mom, 아빠, dad, 배고파, I'm hungry. That was probably most important. 사랑해, which is also really important. I love you. But like I said, it wasn't until much later in my life that I really started to speak and understand Korean. Now, for me, it comes down to two things in which I gauge whether or not I'm proficient or good enough at a certain language. One, do I think or dream in that language? Or two, can I use and understand Korean slang and text terminology? What I mean by that is, how young people text each other and use different kind of terminology and different kind of acronyms or whatever that may be. So, for example, 남친 or 여친, right, is short for 남자친구 or 여자친구, which is boyfriend, girlfriend, right? Or something like 꿀잼, right? 꿀잼, 꿀 is honey, 잼 is like 재미있어, right? So basically it's short for something that's really fun, really interesting, really funny, really cool, something worthwhile. But the opposite is 노잼, right? So no as in just no, and then 잼 as in 재미있어, which is the opposite of 꿀잼. I still can't even say it right. But anyways, I could go on and tell you about all the other Korean slang that I know and that I've learned. But for me, this really is what indicates whether I know the language pretty well, right? If I can communicate for the most part and understand how people talk, and especially these kinds of words that you don't really find in the dictionary, but it's through experience with talking with people, that's when I think that I'm pretty good at speaking the language. It was the summer of 2011. I had the chance to teach English at a really small elementary school in the countryside of Korea. And it was here that I heard a Korean slang that I was really, really confused about at first. You see, when I was teaching English to these students, I would speak, of course, in English so that they could get used to my speaking and they could get used to the English language. But a lot of the times they didn't understand what I was saying. And so sometimes after I would say something in English, they would look to me and say, "Teacher, BanSa." And I'd be like, what is BanSa? Bonsai? Ban? Does that mean, in Korean, ban is room or half, sa, four? Like, what is BanSa? But it was then that there was one student, she explained to me, she pulled out her little mirror from her backpack and she said, "Teacher, you say right?" She couldn't, repeat what I was saying. But I don't know, so, and then she pointed the mirror at me and said, "BanSa." That's when I really realized that BanSa meant reflection, right? And so just like a mirror reflects the object, okay, BanSa is kind of this childish and kind of cheesy way of reflecting back whatever is said to you, and you're giving it back to them, right? So the kids obviously had no idea what I was saying. They thought I was maybe making fun of them or saying bad things about them, which of course wasn't the case. But just in case, they would just say BanSa or reflect it back to me so that I would get that same treatment. Now, the whole ideal of a reflection is that it reflects whatever it is back to you, right? It's kind of like a duplicate, right? Whether it's casting something, it's mirroring something, it's sending back whatever the original image is, message, the light, sound, whatever, it is being sent back. So in Ephesians 5, Paul starts off by talking about this ideal of being an imitator, or what I like to call reflecting, or BanSaing, right? But what are we to BanSa? What are we supposed to reflect? Look at Ephesians 5, verse 1 and 2. It says this, "Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Yesterday, we looked at Ephesians chapter 4, where Paul is talking about Christian living, and he comes to this conclusion of his thoughts by saying, therefore, and this is kind of where we get this. You see, Paul is calling us to be reflectors of God. God should be the model and the example in which we reflect to others. You see, the ideal is also talked about in Ephesians 4:32, where Paul is talking about this ideal of forgiving one another just as God forgave you. Jesus even tells us in John chapter 13, verse 34, it says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another." So this is the thing. A really important in the Christian walk is this, is that we learn to reflect to those around us what God has already done for us. You see, God has given us his love, so we are to reflect love to the world around us. God has forgiven us, so we are to reflect forgiveness to the world around us. So think about what you're reflecting. Is what you're reflecting that from God or from yourself? Are you reflecting the goodness of who God is, or are you reflecting your own desires and wants to other people? You see, when we start to become imitators or reflectors of God, that's when people can truly experience God's love, his forgiveness, and really the gospel message. That's when it becomes real. So let us become imitators of God and reflect the very love and forgiveness that God has shown us first.